Imagine, for just a second, that you are trapped in a literal nightmare. Like, your house is burning down. Your family is inside.
Right.
The heat is blisteringly intense, and the smoke is so thick, so toxic, you can't even see your own hand in front of your face.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
And your absolute only hope in the world is the city's fire department breaking through your front door. But now imagine a detail so dark, it honestly feels like fiction. The father of that trapped family is one of those responding firefighters.
I mean, it's an almost unthinkable scenario. The very person sworn to protect you is riding in the rig, lights and sirens blaring, straight to his own burning home. It is binary in its tragedy.
Completely.
You hear that and you immediately think, well, this has to be the worst accident imaginable.
Right. It's totally devastating. But, today's mission is to take that exact assumption and test it against the evidence. We're doing a deep dive into a transcript from the true crime show Crime Junkie, which unravels the tragic 2023 Chicago house fire that killed 36-year-old Summer Day Stewart and her 3 young children.
Such a heavy case.
It really is. And the goal of this deep dive is to unpack how a seemingly tragic accident, at least according to the sources we're looking at, morphed into this wild web of ignored evidence, institutional conflicts of interest, and just some truly terrifying unanswered questions.
Okay, let's unpack this because the details here are really heavy.
They are heavy. And, to do this justice, we need to look past those emotional headlines. We have to examine the raw data. Because what's fascinating here is that fires, even incredibly destructive ones, act like an unerasable hard drive.
Oh, that's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah, because no matter how much they burn, the thermal patterns and chemical residues essentially record a permanent timeline of exactly what happened. They obey the laws of physics and chemistry.
Right, they don't lie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when the narrative doesn't match the physics, well, we have to start asking why.
So let's set the scene and establish a timeline just based on the case files. It's March 7th, 2023, just after 9:00 p.m. Chicago firefighter Walter Sean Stewart, who goes by Sean, is on duty at his firehouse.
And suddenly, a multiple alarm fire call comes through the radio. He recognizes the address instantly, 2554 North Rutherford Avenue. It's literally his own house.
And according to the reports, he immediately alerts his battalion chief, and the two of them just race to the scene in the chief's SUV.
Just a panicked rush.
Right. Other engines are already arriving. Firefighters are breaking down doors, trying to navigate that zero visibility smoke you described just to find the family.
But the toll is just horrific. Like, firefighters pull the family out one by one. There's Summer, the mother, 9-year-old Autumn, 7-year-old Ezra, who he actually had nonverbal autism and slept on the first floor for his own safety because he tended to wander at night.
Yeah.
And then 2-year-old Emery. They were all pulled from the home unconscious. And sadly, all 4 ultimately die from smoke inhalation the following days without ever waking up.
It's just awful. But, while the family's being rushed to the hospital, the fire investigators get to work. And despite the thousands of gallons of water and the heavy soot and just the total structural destruction, they are actually able to pinpoint the exact origin of the fire very clearly.
Wait, really? Even with all that damage?
Yeah, they found it started on the kitchen stove. The plastic knobs were completely melted away, but the remaining metal stem on one of them was turned all the way to high. And sitting right there on the rear left burner was a pot.
So the transcript mentions this independent arson expert who reviewed the case files, this guy named Dale Ryson. He suggested that, based on the residue, this was likely a pot of oil that was just heated to a boil, bubbled over, hit a flash point, and basically caught the ceiling on fire.
Exactly. And the physics of a grease fire are really important here. When oil hits that flash point, it doesn't just burn slowly, it aerosolizes. It essentially erupts, sending this highly toxic, incredibly thick black smoke rapidly through the entire structure. It consumes oxygen at a terrifying rate. I mean, it's a very fast, very lethal type of fire.
Okay, wait, I have to pause here.
Okay.
Because Sean is a literal Chicago firefighter.
Right.
How does an entire family spread across multiple floors succumb to smoke in a firefighter's house without a single top-of-the-line alarm waking them up? Did the systems just completely fail?
That is the exact right question to ask. And it brings us to our first major physical anomaly in the data. There were Kitty brand-spelled KIDDE smoke detectors installed in the house. In fact, after the fire, Sean actually sued the manufacturer, claiming the alarms completely failed to alert his sleeping family.
Oh, wow. But let me play devil's advocate for a second. Like, is it possible the fire was just so hot and so fast that it melted the alarms right off the ceiling before they could even trigger?
It's a fair theory, for sure, until we apply thermodynamics to the actual crime scene photos. In the hallway near the kitchen, exactly where a detector should have been mounted, investigators found two AA Kitty-branded batteries just laying there on the soot-covered floor.
Oh, wait, just on the floor.
Yeah, and think about the thermal threshold of plastic versus a battery. If the ambient heat in that hallway was severe enough to melt the hard plastic casing of a smoke detector entirely off the ceiling, well, it would have transferred that heat to the batteries inside.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Right. Those batteries would be warped, blistered, or they'd just burst. But they weren't. They were completely intact. They just had this, this light layer of black soot resting on top of them.
So they didn't fall out during the fire. They were already on the floor when the smoke started filling the room.
Precisely. The physical evidence strongly suggests someone manually removed those batteries from the alarm and set them down before the fire ever started.
Okay, if the physical evidence tells us someone purposely disabled the early warning systems, the immediate question becomes, who else was in that house? And what was their state of mind right before the fire? Because the timeline provided by Summer's friends and family is chilling.
Very chilling.
We find out from the Crime Junkie source material that Summer was actually planning to permanently leave Sean the very next day,
Yeah.
March 8th. She had her tax return, she had cash, and she had a secret plan to take the kids and move in with a friend in Oregon.
And the context surrounding that planned escape is incredibly grim. Summer had a documented history of being abused by Sean. There was literally a protective order against him stemming from a 2022 domestic battery arrest where he allegedly pinned her against a wall.
Yeah, and the sources point to these awful audio and video recordings spanning a decade. In one video, he is mockingly grinning while apologizing for hurting her. In another piece of audio, their 7-year-old daughter is describing her father pushing her neck down onto a bed.
The cycle of abuse was highly documented, and she was literally hours away from breaking it. But this is where the transcript moves from this timeline of domestic tension into something medically bizarre.
Right, the autopsies.
Yeah. 2-year-old Emery, a toddler, had a trace amount of lorazepam in his system.
Wait, lorazepam, what is that usually prescribed for?
To understand how strange that is, we have to look at what it actually does. It is a heavy, potent clinical sedative. It's a central nervous system depressant.
So not something you give a toddler to help them sleep.
Oh, absolutely not. Pediatricians generally only use it in highly controlled hospital settings to stop severe, prolonged seizures or for emergency medical sedation. It forces the nervous system to drastically slow down, inducing this deep, unarousable state. There's absolutely no recorded medical reason for this 2-year-old child to have ingested a drug like that at home.
That's terrifying. And then there's Summer's toxicology report, a .312 blood alcohol content. Let's actually break that down, because the math on that doesn't make any sense to me. What does a .312 even look like physically?
I mean, at a .312, you are entering the territory of severe alcohol poisoning. The respiratory system is actively depressed. You are losing basic motor function, memory, consciousness. For most casual drinkers, that is a comatose level of intoxication.
But the timeline makes that nearly impossible. Her friend Cleo spoke to her on a Facebook Messenger call at 7:30 p.m., just an hour and a half before the fire started. And Cleo stated Summer sounded completely sober, totally normal, and just, excited for her trip to Oregon. How do you process that much alcohol that fast?
You practically can't, not without extreme deliberate action. To bridge that gap, to go from sounding perfectly lucid at 7:30 p.m. to a .312 BAC when the fire starts around 8:40 p.m., the absorption rate is staggering. She would have had to consume the equivalent of about 10 straight shots of hard liquor in roughly 60 minutes.
That's like preparing to run a marathon the next morning by suddenly deciding to take a sledgehammer and break your own legs. It makes zero logical sense. It completely contradicts the profile of a mother who has meticulously planned a secret, high-stakes cross-country escape with her 3 kids.
Which is why these medical anomalies force the narrative to diverge into 2 very distinct theories. On one hand, you have the official leaning, right? A wildly tragic accident fueled by sudden, severe alcohol abuse, a forgotten pot of oil on the stove, and tragically faulty smoke detectors.
Right, the official story.
But on the other hand, if you connect the pharmacology of the lorazepam in the toddler, the thermodynamics of the physically removed batteries on the floor, and this rapid, completely unexplained incapacitation of a mother on the absolute eve of her escape, it paints a picture of deliberate, sinister interference.
And we have to talk about her autopsy, too.
Yeah.
Summer had 4 broken ribs and a fractured sternum. Now, Sean is a trained EMT. He gave her CPR on the front lawn. The source material notes that it's, possible he was just panicked and pushed too hard. But it also raises the question, could those injuries have happened before the fire, during an assault?
Well, the mechanism of injury is notoriously difficult to parse in these situations. CPR requires forceful central chest compressions, which absolutely can fracture the sternum and the ribs connecting to it.
Okay, so that's possible.
It is. However, blunt force trauma from an assault often presents with fractures on the lateral sides or the posterior of the ribs. The autopsy data here leaves a shadow of ambiguity. It doesn't definitively prove an assault, but coupled with that protective order, it certainly doesn't rule it out.
With all of these massive, glaring red flags, the disabled alarms, the heavy sedatives in a toddler, the impending escape, the documented history of domestic violence, any listener would naturally expect the police to launch a rigorous, exhaustive homicide investigation. But according to the Crime Junkie host, what actually happened was a complete systemic failure.
Yeah, the sources point heavily toward a massive institutional conflict of interest. The Chicago Fire Department and the Chicago Police Department were essentially left to investigate one of their own. Sean was an active-duty Chicago firefighter.
Which seems like a huge problem right out of the gate.
Exactly. Now, according to state policy in Illinois, when there's a fatality in a fire, or when local authorities can't easily determine the cause, or when there is a glaring conflict of interest, an independent agency like the state fire marshal or the APF must be called in to take over the investigation to ensure impartiality.
But they weren't called. The local departments just kept the investigation completely in-house. And the sources argue that because they kept it in-house, basic day-one police work was totally ignored. They report that there was no neighborhood canvas to look for doorbell or security cameras that might show someone entering or leaving the house.
Right.
They didn't even pull Summers' phone records.
Which is an astounding lack of digital forensics.
It really is. Because around 8:00 p.m., right as the fire is likely starting or about to start, Summer sent a frantic Facebook message to her friend Cleo that just said, "Can you call me back?"
And Cleo was at work, so she couldn't answer immediately. When she tried calling back just 10 minutes later, Summer never picked up. If you are investigating a suspicious death, tracing the exact digital footprint of the victim's final hour is standard operating procedure.
Yeah.
But the sources highlight an even more egregious oversight, and it actually takes us right back to those Kitty AA batteries on the hallway floor.
This part is so frustrating. They didn't collect the batteries.
Yeah.
They didn't take them into evidence.
They didn't even dust them for fingerprints. And the arson expert, Dale Ryson, pointed out a crucial detail about how fire science interacts with forensic science. Soot actually acts as a perfect preservative for fingerprints.
Wait, really? How does that work? I always thought a fire destroyed evidence like that.
You'd think so, but think about what a fingerprint actually is. It's a delicate deposit of natural skin oils and sweat. In normal conditions, it can degrade easily. But in a fire, heavy carbon soot falls and coats the item. That soot chemically seals the oils underneath a protective layer of carbon. If investigators carefully wipe away the top layer of soot later in a lab, the pristine fingerprint is often locked underneath.
Wow.
Yeah. If someone intentionally took those batteries out of the alarm that night, their fingerprints were likely sitting right there on the floor, perfectly preserved, just waiting to be collected.
But they just left them there. According to the transcript, instead of aggressively pursuing those leads, the police focused almost entirely on confirming Sean's alibi. He claimed he was at the firehouse all day, except for a quick grocery run around 8:30 in the morning to buy food for the crew.
Right.
And it took journalists 5 months, multiple denied FOIA requests, and the intervention of the Attorney General just to get the Chicago Police Department to release the grocery store video verifying he was there.
And for those unfamiliar, FOIA stands for the Freedom of Information Act. It's the legal mechanism journalists use to force the government to release public records.
It's usually a hassle, yeah.
It is a tedious process, but what the sources question is, why fight so hard to hide a video that merely confirms the official timeline? When institutions throw up aggressive legal red tape over seemingly benign evidence, it creates an atmosphere of deep distrust.
And the sources point out that this specific fire department has a dark history with trust. Sean used to work at Engine 91. That is the exact same Chicago firehouse where, back in 2020, a crew literally altered time cards and lied to investigators to cover for a fellow firefighter who had accidentally run over and killed his own wife.
Yeah, the deep dive frames this as a continuation of the blue wall of silence, and if we analyze that psychologically, it's really a masterclass in institutional bias. The Chicago Fire Department eventually raised nearly $500,000 for Sean after the fire.
That's a massive amount of money.
It is. So think about the psychological sunk cost at play there. It is far easier and far more emotionally comforting for a tight-knit brotherhood to view their colleague as the tragic victim of an unimaginable accident. To shift that perspective, to suddenly aggressively investigate him as a suspect in the murder of his own children, well, that requires shattering the institution's self-image.
Right, they just don't want to see it.
Exactly. That level of cognitive dissonance often leads to willful blindness.
Willful blindness. That's exactly what the hosts of the true crime show are arguing happened here. Because the official record calls this an undetermined fire. They officially classify the deaths of Summer, Autumn, Ezra, and Emery as non-criminal. Case closed.
But the data they left behind refuses to close the case. The perfectly preserved, untouched batteries. The impossible math of the alcohol consumption. The heavy clinical sedative in a 2-year-old child. The desperate final digital message. The data screams that a deeper, truly independent investigation is owed to that family. The central thesis here is that oversight isn't just some bureaucratic buzzword. It is the only mechanism we have to break through in-group bias.
It's just so heartbreaking. A mother was on the absolute verge of freedom. She had the cash. She had the plan. She had the route to Oregon mapped out. And instead, she and her 3 innocent kids were trapped in a house that had been quietly, systematically stripped of its early warning systems. The alarms were muted. And the argument here is that the investigation that followed was muted too.
Which leaves us analyzing the silence, when the institutions tasked with asking the hard questions refuse to ask them. The evidence just sits there, waiting.
And that raises a fascinating question about how investigations might change in the future. We talked about those basic AA batteries. But think about the smart home technology that is so common today. If this house had a modern Wi-Fi-enabled smoke detector like, say, a Nest system, it wouldn't just go silent if someone removed the battery.
Oh, that's a really good point, right?
It would instantly log a digital timestamp to a cloud server noting exactly when it was disabled.
It's a profound point. A smart lock on the front door would log exactly who entered and exited the house and when. A smart thermostat would record the exact minute the ambient temperature spiked, creating just this undeniable timeline.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, if this tragedy had occurred in a house equipped with a modern digital footprint, rather than basic 1990s analog tech, would the sheer weight of the cloud data have made ignoring the evidence impossible? How many closed cases from the past would have been forced into the light if our homes were keeping a permanent, unerasable digital record of our final moments?